My name is Jeff Pollock, and I'm the president of Global Strategy Group. I have the pleasure of doing this panel with these three talented individuals from the communications world. I also am going to do what I do best, which is to talk about data, and some of you have already been bored by me once, so I'll try to keep it lively. I will make not 1, 2, or 3 drug jokes like my friend Dr. Luntz, I promise, but hopefully we'll keep it interesting. This is something that's very important to us in terms of looking at the intersection between business and politics. And so we went out and did a survey that I'm about to show you. Let me briefly go down the line. Steve, who's sitting next to me? Steve Lombardo, usually to my right today for the unusual time to my left. Steve Lombardo from Koch Industries, Marie Van Luling at H&R Block, Brian Flaherty, who works at Nestle Waters North America. They're all going to talk about their experience, but as I said, I wanted to start with a little bit of data. So if you don't mind, I'm going to show you something. And this data, I realize many of you are not from the United States. This is going to be data that is focused on the United States and United States public opinion. But as we discussed earlier, what's the notion of the intersection of data and PR and communications? Well, for example, we wanted to look at, and this is actually the second time we've done this study, this is the second year, and we're releasing it exclusively today. The results of this will be outside. You'll be able to pick this up on the literature table outside. But we wanted to first and foremost say, okay, if a company were a person, would it be a Democrat or a Republican? Many of us have been in focus groups where we say, is this company like a car? Is this company like an animal? What would it be like? Well, for us, we wanted to say, is it a Democrat or a Republican? So for example, at the top of the heap, you can see Democrats 77-23. They say MTV would be a Democrat. I'd like to find the 23%, frankly, who say they're Republicans, okay? On the bottom, you can see News Corp. Not on the bottom, but just on the other side, News Corp, where it's 77-23, Republican to Democrat. Again, I'd like to find the 23% who say Democrat. But the point of this is you can look down all of these bits of data from MTV, Nickelodeon, Whole Foods, etc., all the way down to Chick-fil-A, Tiffany, and News Corp. Why would Tiffany, for example, which doesn't take particularly controversial stands, why are they seen as a Republican company? Well, we all have our suppositions, but the point is that the data shows that people have a belief that companies might be more like Democrats or Republicans. Oops. Thank you. In addition, as I said, we did this study over 2 years. We released the first results last year. Here you can see that over the last year, there's been an increase in every single question that we asked. For example, corporations should have the freedom to express their political views, up 5 points in a year. It's important for corporations to take a stance on political issues that affect their business, up 7 points to 79%. Corporations should take action to address the important issues facing society, up 8 points to 80%. And finally, corporations have the power to influence social change, up 8 points to 89%. Amazing, and amazing the difference within 1 year. One final slide that shows a real dramatic difference. So between 2013 and 2014, we asked a question: corporations should stand up for what they believe politically, regardless of whether or not it's controversial. And in 2013, only 44% agreed with that. A majority said it's inappropriate for corporations to take a stance on a political issue that has nothing to do with their business. Today, those numbers are flipped, 56-44, a dramatic change. And so, of course, you have to wonder, well, who's driving that? Because maybe it's just Democrats, maybe it's just Republicans. But it's not. Both sides of the aisle evenly moved. Look at the numbers. Democrats in 2013 were 62-38, saying it's inappropriate. Now it's 50-50. Right, a 12-point move in both directions. Same thing with Republicans. It's been an 11-point move in both directions among Republicans, where today it's 67-33. Yes, Republicans started out more in favor of corporations taking a stand, but the point is the movement is exactly the same in a year. So that is a dramatic thing when we see public opinion shift. I'm going to sit down and ask the panelists a couple of things. I'll come back to a little bit of data in a bit. But first, I wanted to turn to Steve. And Steve, obviously, your company has the most clear corporate political brand. How'd that decision happen? How have you navigated it? You came from two of the largest PR firms before this. And so, you have an understanding of kind of the PR and the politics behind all this. So talk a little bit about how you've dealt with it at Koch Industries in the last year that you've been there.
Sure. Thanks, Jeff. Pleasure to be here. Is anybody from the New York Times here today?
We'll have to find somebody.
Okay. I asked that question because it'd be nice. I think they ought to hear this too. I think one of the first things that we learned, and over the years I've tried to keep in mind, is that not everything you read in the media is true, and nor is the amplification that the media gives sinking into the general public. And the first thing that I'd say to answer your question is we decided sort of, when I came on board, is sort of do the math, kind of find out what people really are thinking and to what extent they understand the company that I work for, and to what extent they have feelings either positive or negative. And if you read the media and if you read press stories around politics, you'd think, well, Koch Industries, Koch brothers, everybody must know them and have an opinion. Sure, some people do, and some of those opinions are negative, some are very positive. But for the most part, we found a lot of people had no clue about Koch Industries and what we did and what we do. So the starting point was a little bit different than if you just read the newspapers. Our starting point was there was an information gap, and people needed to understand better who we are and what we did, and that what we didn't need to do was persuade people as much as we needed to just inform about who we are. So that was the starting point for us, and it was a recognition that we needed to provide information nuggets. So when recruitment came to us and said, listen, we need to bolster recruitment, we want to do an ad campaign, it was easy to say, look, we need to inform about basic things about who we are. We are a manufacturing company that produces products that people use every day. We have 60,000 employees in the US, 100,000 people globally. These were things that people didn't know. So that started to give us traction.
And one other question, Steve, because you also come from a research background. How did research play into your decisions, your process, how you attack the problem, certainly the ads?
Well, and I think it helped. We looked at both some of the public polling and a lot of the public polling that's out there. Interestingly, and the media, again, doesn't play up a lot of this, but even the Wall Street Journal polling had us substantially, while we had an unfavorable rating, and you talk about favorable, unfavorable, we had one that was fairly high, but it wasn't any higher than a lot of the big energy companies that are out there. While we're more diversified and we have a lot more consumer touch points with Georgia Pacific and Invista as part of our company, the recognition was that, is that we had an opportunity, if you will, to tell our story. And when you first looked at some of the media coverage, you'd go, oh my gosh, we can't, we've got to change a lot of minds. The fact is, when you looked at some of the data, we didn't have to change minds. We simply had to tell people who we were.
Marie, if you could, you come from two places, your current job at H&R Block, but before that you come from the highly regulated energy and utility space. So what's been your experience here in terms of business and politics and the overlap, both from the H&R experience and the utility experience?
Well, the calculus is really different when you're not a private company, when you're especially a highly regulated company. I often tell people it's kind of like being a high school girl. You're trying to figure out how to be popular and smart at the same time, because you're trying to figure out how to navigate between a variety of stakeholders. And especially in the utility business, you're infused with public good. So your engagement has to reflect your customers as well as your investors. And that challenge is one that you constantly are balancing. What it's translated into at Block, where we are a company that stands up a workforce for 4 months of a year, we go from 3,000 employees to 90,000 employees for 4 months. We have 10,000 stores across the country, and 40% of our market is small business franchise. So we have a lot of interests within our organization that need to be represented and whose voice needs to be heard at the political level. But we do it in a way where we tend not to engage on key like tax reform law, but what we do engage in is administration of the tax code. So how our customers, how our associates will be able to actually deliver in that environment. I think the challenge with that in creating, your presence and your brand in that is figuring out how to be true to those interests of those customers and those associates at the same time you migrate through the political minefield.
And what happened, Maria, more on the utility space, I think, because I don't know that H&R Block has had this issue in terms of political contributions, but you dealt with some sort of difficulty from a PR communications perspective, difficulty with your executives at your previous company, for example, donating to politics. At H&R Block, you've had to weigh in on the ACA. I mean, these are very tricky political things. So in each one of them, sort of how did you deal with it? What was the strategy or thought behind it?
I think inevitably to play in the political sphere, you're in the money game somehow or another.
Right.
And in both instances, both at Northeast Utilities and at Block, we had a pretty robust PAC as well as engagement with our associates across the board to be politically active, both financially and in other grassroots ways. But I think the challenge is when you think, like with the ACA, we began conversations early on with HHS and others to say, how do we figure out how to deliver for our customers on this? That begat a large, controversy for us anyway, where we and others were supposedly strong-armed by the Secretary for money, which was never the case, but it was a great political story. Mm-hmm. So we moved away from engaging with them and figured out other ways to figure out how to participate in the ACA conversation. But utilizing money at the end of the day becomes just one tool along the way. And if you're smart, and you can utilize PAC, which is governed by your associates, a board of associates who make decisions about how you'll give, I think you can work through that minefield. When you look at utilities, even they're never going to be the largest donators.
Right.
They're just not going to be by definition, but they are going to have to be in the mix in order to get recognized.
Don't worry, Marie, you're sitting next to the man who is privileged to the largest donor, so he can talk a lot about that. Brian.
Sizes and everything, as we know. I'm just saying.
That's what I've heard.
Okay.
I also want to be pretty and smart. So, Brian, why don't you talk a little bit about Nestle Waters and your experience? I think in particular, you've engaged directly with the Obama administration. Talk about that process, how you decided to do that, and certainly was there any impact on it? And then we'll talk about some more local examples that you've had.
Sure, I appreciate that. I'm the other Flaherty, by the way. I met Rob today, so if you got I got a few of your emails, Rob. I think I'll make sure that you get them from this morning. Our first trick is to try and personify the company. Nestle Waters North America is not very well known as a company. Consumers know us by our brands, which would be Zephyr Hills here in Florida or Poland Spring in the Northeast. Incidentally, not this one. But and so the hard thing to do is to personify the company. And, we get into this debate that our corporation's people. And one of the startling pieces of your research was how the people, not only they're looking at corporations to stand for things and to increase their involvement, but willing to believe that they should also have the speech rights. And so our corporation is an association, a group of people. We're united on a common purpose, and that is providing bottled water. We're the world's largest water bottler. And so in that process, voice matters. And so we had the opportunity. I've been at the company 11 years now. When I started, the tap versus bottled water, debate was much more prevalent than it is today. And what we did, to your question, is earlier this year, we actually a year ago, worked with Partnership for a Healthier America, which was chaired by the First Lady. And we joined the Drink Up, which is the next piece of Let's Move, which united my company and other beverage companies, American Beverage Association, with filter companies, with mayors, with other private water companies, with people that make Nalgene and clean canteens and all manners of people that help Americans find their way to water. When that happened, it allowed us to shift to start talking about, there are 3/4 of what Americans drink comes in a container. Water ought to be one of those, and we are just one way that people get water. That helped us change that debate and hopefully focus on and partner. It certainly, I'm in government affairs, and it certainly has been something that we've used in the government affairs arena, particularly with mayors. Look, we're partners. Let's work together.
So, did an affiliation with Obama, and you, of course, got to pick the more popular Obama, so you got
Indeed.
you got that one, right? So you got Michelle. You associate with the Democratic White House. Is there any impact on the brand to you, and were you concerned about impact on the brand?
We will, yes, there was some concern in the brands. I mean, you've got a corporate voice, which I work on, and there are also brand voices. And there was some concern. We have a brand, Ice Mountain, out in the middle of Michigan. The politics in Michigan, very, very, very conservative these days. But we're also in California, we're also in Maine, we're also in other places. And it's interesting. We have almost, from where our 28 U.S. factories are, about an even representation in Republican or red or blue states. But not only was there the risk, would there be backlash? We haven't seen it. And the second thing is the president is in his second term, so there will be a change in presidents and first ladies pretty soon. And there was also that, okay, how do we tie ourselves to this? The good news is, and it's really through the Partnership for a Healthier America, we see that this can continue. We see this is something that can go on. And actually, to have it coming from a Democratic administration, just in the politics of bottled water and in some of the capitals, helped.
Mm-hmm. Marie, we mentioned the ACA, which is Obamacare, as it's commonly known in political circles. Did you get blowback, particularly because you have a lot of these franchises in places that are very conservative, that you were sort of playing politics on Obamacare and getting involved with something that, for many people, they have a viscerally negative reaction to?
I think what made it easier for us is by the time we were engaged, it was the law of the land. We weren't engaged early on. We weren't engaged in lobbying for or against the bill. But once it passed and it becomes the law of the land, our job is to implement it. And that's really what you go back to your franchisees and say is, you're still going to have to serve your customers. They're going to have questions. How are you going to engage on this? And I think, again, to what Brian has said and Steve both, at the end of the day, the character of the company has to be consistent with what you're representing and how you're taking your positions. Otherwise, you end up, because politically, you're always going to end up with strange bedfellows. You're going to end up supporting a congressperson or a senator who might, on other issues, not be in alignment with you, but you need that person in alignment on this particular issue. So you have to be able to stay true to your character in the midst of walking through that political process.
Steve, your company certainly has a political brand, as we've discussed. So Harry Reid, the Senate Majority Leader, calls your company, let's just say, he uses the Koch brothers, but clearly he's calling out the company to some extent on the floor of the United States Senate and calls them, I think he said evil. May have been even worse than that, right?
As un-American as you can imagine.
Un-American as you can imagine. So politics is always prone to hyperbole, of course. I don't think that that seems aggressive, right? But you've heard worse before. But on the floor of the United States Senate, for somebody to take on your company, what do you think at that moment, and how do you respond from a corporate perspective? Not political, but from a corporate perspective.
Sure, and it's a delicate balance. I'm just interested to learn from Brian that corporations are people too. I thought we litigated that in 2012, but now I find out that we are, so that's good to know. But I think that's what your data's about, right?
Yes.
I really do. And so regardless of what Senator Reid said, he has a right to express his opinion. I think it's pretty unusual for a Senate Majority Leader to attack private citizens on the floor of the Senate. He's able to do that because there's no repercussions. He's protected by the United States Constitution. But he has a right to his opinion. We wish that some people would be equally as agreeable to us having the right to our opinion. As a corporation, it's a delicate balance. Marie's right, we represent a lot of different people. And this Koch Industries employs, as I said, 100,000 globally. About a third of our employees are union members here in the U.S. And so we represent a lot of different people doing a lot of different things. So our response to that, frankly, was nothing. We decided very strongly. Now, there was a political response that has happened since then, and our shareholders are involved in that political response, and that's their choice, and they're playing in the political process, and that's their right to do that. But from a corporate perspective, our job was not to lose focus. We had to stay focused on what we were trying to do, and that was tell the story of who we are and what we do in a more robust fashion. And this is unlike privately held companies. Koch Industries, publicly held, Koch Industries is private. In the past, they've not felt the necessity. They don't have an investor relations issue. And so not felt the necessity to tell the story. And it was our charge to say, no, we've got to. We're in a highly regulated, businesses. Many of our businesses are highly regulated. And we need to tell people who we are and what we do to give them a better understanding, to be able to recruit people, to be able to retain employees, and to sort of defend the corporation, if you will. What Harry Reid did or didn't do really didn't have much of an impact on what we were going to do. We were going to tell our story regardless. And the last thing I'll say on what Marie said about being true, I don't think certainly don't hide from who you are. And actually what we've tried to do is run toward it. We have a very distinct culture and a philosophy that comes straight from the chairman and CEO, Charles Koch, and it's very distinct in the American workplace. But we've decided that we're going to run toward that. That is who we are, and we're better off being that. And all of you in this room know authenticity is critical, and we've got it in spades. Now, some people may not like that authenticity, but we're going to express it every chance we can.
But Steve, just one small follow-up. So I'm sure the Harry Reid incident itself didn't have an impact on the company, but right after that, or in the middle of that, Democratic candidates across this country started running paid advertising, tearing down your brand, right? And that's got to have some impact, and obviously highly unusual in our political scene where we're used to yelling bad things about other people, but third parties are normally not involved. So, what did you see an impact, and were you able to recover?
Well, what has happened politically is unprecedented, I think, in American history. I can't think of another example like this. Their political opponents have spent millions and millions of dollars in probably 8 to 10 key states in this country. We're aware of that. And certainly, your question is it recoverable? We certainly feel like it is. My gut instincts, and I don't have any hard data on this, is that this, quite frankly, the American public looks at this and wonders what's going on. These people aren't on the ballot. They've probably done a good job in raising money off of this, but I don't think in terms of having an impact in the election or having a long-term impact on our brand, I don't think it will, as long as we continue to do our job.
Yeah, the only other example I could think of is Bain Capital for Romney, and they were sort of an unindicted co-conspirator because he wasn't even there anymore. So, but that certainly was effective. Brian, if you could just talk about kind of the politics of what you deal with on a micro level, when you're dealing with a ban. Brian has to deal with a community that says we don't want bottled water because we don't want all this plastic. So how do you deal with that? And again, how do you recover from a brand when that's dirty politics to get that involved?
Well, and it's hard when the brands are affected, and I'll pick up on what Steve said. I started the company in 2003, and there was a time when we might have been, in our trade association, somewhat defensive. Water in a bottle, and whether it's about recycling, and it's far too low in the United States, whether it's about whether the water comes, how much water is used versus other beverages. It certainly was something we were defending. Now, we kind of have taken the position of, now that we have your attention, let's talk about this. Let's talk about the bottle. And let's talk about a corporation that supports extended producer responsibility for packaged goods, and not just beverages, like some bottle bills do. But let's really talk about making sure that we build the cost of recycling into our packaging. Let's talk about the water. Let's talk about where the water comes from and how much water it takes to produce a bottle of spring water, for example, or bottled water versus beer, soda, and a lot of other things which are terrific. As I said, 3/4 of what Americans drink comes in a container. And let's talk about today, making sure that water is there and water is available. So, just last week, I was in the town of Framingham, Massachusetts, just outside of Boston. We have a bottling facility there. And a 17-year-old high school senior, captain of the debate team in his high school, proposed at town meeting to outlaw the sale of single-serve water in a bottle. And that's something that certainly got our attention. Stop and Shop, the retailers and folks basically saying we're going to take all plastic water in case pack off the shelves. And we had seen this also in Concord, Massachusetts when it passed. The difference here, we have we actually support 200 jobs, and we talk about the voice of our company. It wasn't so much, I didn't say anything out loud, but I helped our plant managers say, I'm here on behalf of the people that I work with, and talk about the impact. And I think, again, going back to the changing in the shift for water, members got up at town meeting and said, this is great. But if you would have thought of all the things you could ban and outlaw on the shelves of a grocery store or a CVS or a pharmacy, would you start with water? And one woman in particular, I'd never met her. Our family is organic. I take an Nalgene with me, but I can't always have it. And if that's the case, I want to be able to buy this and not have it be illegal. So it's changed how we meet one-on-one. It's again, providing that voice and talking in a corporation, but also as a way not to impact the brand itself. The brands have a whole different group of people in my company that don't necessarily like getting in the middle of politics.
I'm sure. We're going to open up to questions while the microphone is passed. I just want to show a couple of other things while the microphone gets passed. Raise your hand if you have a question for anyone on the panel. You can see, for example, that by and large, most people don't even notice that corporations take political stances. The one that sits out there at 54%, Chick-fil-A in the United States, there was a lot of controversy because the head of Chick-fil-A came out vehemently against gay marriage. That got a tremendous amount of news. But some of these others have taken political stances that have made news. You can see nothing like that. And again, the Chick-fil-A one being the really standout and the anomaly, far more so than anything else. You're going to see in the documents that we have, and I said in the literature table outside, you'll find this full study. But we've got a couple of different case studies that show that even, for example, if the public, 40% of the American public said that it was appropriate to be for gay marriage, but that when Nordstrom said LGBT issues, LGBT employees are entitled to the same rights, that notion, that corporate action increases, meaning companies that tie a stance to their business and then take action, they're better received than a company that doesn't. So you'll see a couple of different examples of this, including one from Nestle Waters in our literature. Finally, there are 5 key communications lessons that we have for people to consider that you'll find in the packet. I'd love people to ask some questions in the 5 minutes that we have for anyone in the audience. So please raise your hand, and we look forward to you reading more. Paul, you're allowed to ask one too, I know.
Is that sort of statistic true for first movers? Because we're in a world where not everyone has taken a stance yet. So clearly in the fashion world for Nordstrom, that's a very smart position to take.
It isn't.
Do you end up with Me Too's is what I'm saying.
It isn't. It isn't. Again, I mean, at the time that Nordstrom took that position, it wasn't as if the American public was necessarily overwhelmingly behind equal rights for gays and lesbians. So I wouldn't assume just because it was the fashion industry, I mean, that could be part of it. But from everything I know, that actually wasn't it. It was sort of the notion of this is the right thing to do. There have been multiple times. I think first movers are always going to be the ones. If I can go back one slide, I couldn't go back to the last slide. Companies who are first movers are certainly the ones who are the most in danger, right? Because if you take that first move and you get it wrong, you got a problem. So, for example, we talk about know which way the wind blows, right? Do the research and figure it out, and figure out if this is going to really be a problem for you and your customers. consider your audience, particularly millennials. Look, we know that 3/4 of the global workforce by 2025 is going to be millennials. And so if you're not following to some extent where they are, you're going to be behind in a very, very short period of time. Those are the kind of things that we're telling people to be aware of. But funny enough, my progressive friends, and I work in Democratic politics too, the notion that I'm sitting up here for the last hour basically saying that corporations are people, that's certainly what the American consumers believe at this point. Other questions? There's one right in the middle.
Hi, would any of you like to comment on the fact that most luxury brands seem to be Republican and mass brands seem to be Democrat?
Who wants to take it? Look, I mean, there's a perception, right? The perception that the Republicans are the party of the wealthy, and that's why, as I said, somewhat jokingly, but somewhat seriously, right? Tiffany is sitting there as the most Republican brand because they are perceived to be of wealth. And certainly the Republican Party has been successfully branded by the Democrats as the party of the wealthy. And the flip on the MTV is because the Democrats are the party of the young slackers. And so clearly the brand is hewing to the partisan labels. But then you can also see there is a mixture in all those brands, right? I mean, once you get beyond the top and the bottom, there's a whole bunch in the middle. Like, why do the hotel chains lean towards the Republican side? I don't actually know. I mean, is it because hotels are for wealthy people? I think regular families stay in hotels too. And so the Marriott brand maybe is associated with a long time, strong conservative family, but I don't think so. Like, that seems to be aggressive. It's one of those things I'd like to find out more, but what do you guys think?
I'll just comment. I honestly don't think, frankly, some of this stuff people are just guessing.
Yeah.
And they're going with associations that aren't based on any facts that they have. And that's a problem for all of us, right? I mean, that's my problem, with the company that I work for right now, is people are taking little bits that they hear or associations and making connections that really aren't true. And the purpose of your strong brand, creating a strong brand connection, is to really ameliorate those that are negative and fortify those that are strong. And but I would say a lot of this is just based on, they're just guessing.
Yeah.
I found that the American voter, the American citizen in the public square doesn't always act the same way as the American consumer in the beverage aisle. And actually, Jeffrey's company, Global, did some work with us up in the state of Maine about 2007, and I was looking through that research. We had more Democratic men drinking bottled water, or Democrats, than Republicans at the time. And you might think bottled water would go the other way around. So it doesn't always, to Steve's point, it doesn't always show up in the data.
Yes, question right there.
The first few slides you showed showing the difference between 13 and 14 were profound.
Yeah.
What is behind that?
I don't know.
Could it be gridlock in Congress, that somebody needs to take a stand, and if not, your elected official? Perhaps the corporations down the street? Is it a function of the election year? What do you think?
It's certainly, I thought of all those things, right? It's certainly possible it's an election year, so people are feeling it. But I don't know why, just because it's an election year, do they feel like companies should be standing up and taking a stronger feeling. I think what we're seeing is a shift in American public opinion on activism. And a frustration with Washington that all of us understand very well, because it impacts every one of us. I mean, the gridlock and disaster that is Washington, D.C., impacts all of us and the perceptions. Why? Because right now, I mean, take an HR Block, for example. I think it's, they're the tax man, but they're not the tax man, right? They're there to help you. Well, does the American consumer think to themselves, I hate all big entities right now. I hate big business. I hate big corporations. I hate taxes. I hate everything. So how does that play out for you guys, Marie?
Well, they don't like taxes, that's for sure.
That's for sure. I know that one.
But they love us. They love us. I think, it's kind of, I think your point is interesting. I think it's a bit of a chicken and an egg conversation. The fact that we have so much more engagement, very public engagement by companies, especially since Citizens United.
Yes.
Are we then really more apt to have an opinion about whether they should be engaged? Because prior to that, why have the opinion? They weren't going to be that visible. So there's I think some of that's going on in the data is that we just have a lot more activity going on, much more transparent activity. And it is an election year, so you're much more aware of it as well, I think.
I think all that's true. I want to thank the panel. We appreciate it. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Thank you.